This is the shocking case of Mira, an Indian bride, whose secret affair with her Australian groom's father, Richard, led to a night of betrayal, rage, and double murder. What began as a dream wedding between Mira and Daniel quickly spiraled into a nightmare that no guest could have ever imagined. Hidden desires, dangerous secrets, and a tragic confrontation turned a celebration of love into one of the most chilling stories of crime and passion. You're watching Your Channel Name, where we uncover true crime cases that keep you on the edge of your seat. If you're new here, make sure you subscribe and stay active so you never miss an update. Your support helps us bring you more stories just like this one. Twisted, tragic, and unforgettable. Now, let's dive deep into the case of the Indian bride's affair with her groom's father that ended in double murder on the wedding night. The day of the wedding began like a dream. The sun rose softly over the rolling hills of the vineyard estate, painting the sky in gentle shades of pink and gold. Guests from India and Australia arrived dressed in their finest clothes, filling the venue with color and excitement. The scent of fresh roses mixed with the crisp aroma of the vines, and the sound of laughter drifted through the air. To everyone present, it looked like the beginning of a love story that would be remembered for generations. The bride, Mira, was radiant in her embroidered red lehenga, her jewelry catching the light as she walked with graceful steps. Beside her, Daniel looked proud in his tailored suit, his smile wide and unshaken. They were photographed under floral arches, lifting champagne glasses while family and friends cheered them on. Every detail had been planned to perfection: the music, the food, the speeches that celebrated their union. Even the vineyard itself seemed alive, as if blessing the couple with its beauty. Nobody in attendance could imagine that beneath the polished surface, shadows were already forming. Mira's eyes, though bright, carried a flicker of something unspoken. Daniel, caught up in the whirlwind of the day, didn't notice. His friends joked, his mother cried tears of joy, and his father, Richard, charmed the guests with his commanding presence. Smiles were exchanged, promises were made, and glasses were raised, sealing what seemed to be an unshakable bond between two families. Yet, while music echoed across the estate and candles glowed under the night sky, a secret lingered dangerously close to discovery. This wedding, celebrated with so much joy, would soon transform into a night of horror that no one could have predicted. It all began months before the wedding, when Mira first arrived in Australia to finalize preparations for her new life. She was far from home, in a country where everything felt unfamiliar, from the food to the language rhythms to the quiet emptiness of suburban streets. In that space of loneliness, Daniel's father, Richard, stepped in. He was older, confident, and had a way of making her feel both secure and admired. Unlike Daniel, who was often buried in work and distracted by planning logistics, Richard took time to listen. He would ask about her childhood in India, her favorite books, her fears about leaving her family behind. Slowly, what began as polite conversations turned into long drives through coastal roads and afternoons spent walking in quiet gardens. He showed her parts of the country that Daniel never thought to share. For Mira, who craved connection, the attention was intoxicating. Richard carried himself with a charm that came from experience, and he treated her with a gentleness that blurred the lines between comfort and temptation. The more time they spent together, the more undeniable the attraction became. Mira tried to resist at first, reminding herself of her upcoming vows, but her heart betrayed her. When their hands touched for the first time, it felt deliberate, heavy with meaning. Soon, the stolen moments turned into secret meetings, each one riskier than the last. A woman about to marry her fiancé was now caught in the grip of something far more dangerous than she could control. Neither Richard nor Mira spoke openly about what they were doing, yet both understood the depth of their betrayal. A single spark of forbidden desire had ignited a fire that threatened to consume everything in its path. The secret affair, once thrilling, soon became a burden that weighed heavily on Mira's conscience. Each time she looked at her wedding dress hanging in the wardrobe or heard relatives discussing the big day, guilt gnawed at her. She tried to remind herself of her duty, the promises she had made to Daniel, and the trust his family had placed in her. Yet every stolen glance at Richard reignited the flame she thought she could extinguish. Richard, on the other hand, seemed less conflicted. He carried the confidence of a man who had lived through decades of choices and mistakes, and he convinced himself that what he shared with Mira was genuine love rather than reckless indulgence. He would send her cryptic notes, slip her gifts when no one was watching, and find excuses to visit her when Daniel was away. What had started as a comforting friendship now turned into something obsessive. Mira feared discovery more than anything else. She knew that if the truth emerged, it would not only destroy her marriage, but also bring shame to her family back in India. Every time she imagined her parents learning of her betrayal, her chest tightened with dread. Still, she found herself unable to sever ties with Richard. He would whisper promises that tempted her fragile resolve, hints that he wanted more than secrecy, that he believed they were destined for each other. By the time the wedding day drew near, Mira was caught in a dangerous spiral of passion and panic. On the final night before the ceremony, Richard told her with chilling certainty that their love would never remain hidden forever. His words, heavy and cryptic, hung in her mind like a storm cloud she could not escape. The celebrations of the wedding stretched long into the night, with laughter, music, and the clinking of glasses echoing across the vineyard estate. Guests slowly drifted away, leaving behind the scent of wine and roses. For the bride and groom, the festivities concluded with a retreat to their luxurious bridal suite, a room adorned with silk sheets, candles, and flower petals scattered across the bed. To outsiders, it appeared to be the beginning of a romantic first night together, the perfect continuation of a perfect wedding. Daniel was tired but content, basking in the joy of a day that had gone exactly as planned. Mira, however, carried a storm inside her chest. She smiled for her husband, but her heart pounded with a fear and anticipation she could not name aloud. Meanwhile, Richard wandered through the estate with heavy steps. He had drunk enough wine to embolden him, but not enough to dull his focus. Every laugh he shared during the party, every toast he raised, had been a mask concealing the truth. When the crowd finally dispersed, he made his way quietly toward the private wing of the estate. He knew where Mira and Daniel were staying, and he intended to see her one last time, convinced that their connection was stronger than the vows she had just taken. Unbeknownst to Richard, Daniel had noticed his father's unusual movements. The sudden disappearance from the after-party, the way Richard's eyes lingered too long on Mira during the day, had planted seeds of suspicion. Driven by an unease he could not shake, Daniel followed at a distance. The night, meant for intimacy and joy, was slowly curdling into something far more sinister as paths began to collide in deadly secrecy. Inside the bridal suite, the atmosphere shifted from quiet celebration to unbearable tension within seconds. Daniel entered expecting to find his new wife waiting, but what he saw tore through him like a blade. Richard stood too close to Mira, his hand brushing hers, their eyes meeting with a familiarity that could not be explained away. In that moment, the truth Daniel had feared but never dared to believe was confirmed. The room, decorated with candles and rose petals for a night of romance, became the stage for betrayal. Shock froze him, but only briefly. The weight of humiliation and rage surged through him, crashing like a wave that refused to recede. Richard tried to hold his ground, his presence calm, but his silence loaded with defiance. Mira's face, pale and terrified, revealed more than words ever could. Daniel felt his entire life unravel, the wedding vows spoken only hours earlier reduced to hollow echoes. The image of his father and his bride together ignited something primal inside him. The shouting, the shoving, the wild rush of bodies clashing turned the intimate suite into a battleground. Furniture rattled, glasses toppled, and the carefully staged perfection of the night shattered. In a desperate fury, Daniel reached for the nearest object, a heavy champagne bottle from the table. Without thinking, he swung with all the strength his anger could summon. The bottle struck Richard's head with a sickening crack, silencing him instantly. Richard collapsed onto the carpet, motionless, his blood spreading darkly against the white rug. The room fell into a horrifying stillness. Mira gasped in horror, realizing the confrontation had ended not with words, but with irreversible violence. The father lay dead, and the son's world had just collapsed in an instant. The silence in the room after Richard's fall was suffocating. Daniel stood frozen, staring at his father's lifeless body sprawled across the carpet, the crimson stain widening beneath his head. His chest heaved as reality crashed into him. He had not meant for this to happen. The blow had been an explosion of rage, not a calculated act. Yet the evidence before him was undeniable. Richard was gone, and Daniel's own hands had delivered the fatal strike. Mira trembled in the corner, her hands clutching the fabric of her bridal dress, her mind spinning in disbelief. She whispered frantic pleas for calm, urging Daniel to think, to act before someone discovered them. But her voice only deepened his torment. Daniel looked at her, his grief twisting into fury. He saw not only his father's blood on the floor, but also Mira's betrayal etched across her face. Every tender smile she had shared with Richard, every stolen glance, flashed through his mind like cruel reminders. His love for her transformed into venom, and the weight of humiliation pressed harder on his chest. He accused her silently in his heart, convinced that she had orchestrated everything, that she had turned father against son. In his spiraling state, reason slipped away. Mira reached out to calm him, but her touch only reignited his anger. In one desperate motion, Daniel grabbed a pillow from the bed and pressed it against her face. Her struggles were frantic, her hands clawing at his wrists, but his strength was unrelenting. Within minutes, her body went limp beneath him, her bridal jewelry clinking softly as she stilled. Now, two bodies lay before him, his father and his bride, victims of one night's unthinkable spiral into madness. Daniel sat among the wreckage of the bridal suite, his chest heaving as the enormity of what he had done settled in. The bodies of his father and wife lay before him, two lives extinguished in a storm of rage and betrayal. For a long time, he did nothing but stare, numb and hollow. Then the pounding of his heart gave way to a new instinct, survival. If anyone discovered the truth, his life would be over. The thought of handcuffs, police sirens, and headlines filled him with dread. He told himself he could still find a way to conceal what had happened, to make it appear like nothing more than a tragedy. He dragged Richard's body first, struggling with the dead weight as blood streaked across the floor. Then he turned to Mira, her once dazzling bridal attire now disheveled and stained, a haunting reminder of vows broken within hours of being spoken. He pulled them both through quiet corridors, making sure no guest stirred, until he reached the vineyard's wine cellar. The cool air greeted him like a grave. He laid them down among the barrels, arranging them in a twisted tableau. Daniel smashed glasses and scattered shards across the ground, pouring wine over the scene to mask the blood. He imagined investigators arriving to find a tragic accident, two people drunk, celebrating recklessly, meeting their end in a fall. It was a fragile story, but in his desperation, it felt like the only option. Exhausted, his clothes damp with sweat and wine, Daniel returned to his suite, scrubbing at his hands as though the stains could be erased. He whispered to himself that no one would ever know, even as doubt gnawed relentlessly at the edges of his mind. Morning light crept across the vineyard, bringing with it the shocking discovery that would unravel Daniel's fragile plan. A staff member entered the cellar to fetch wine for breakfast service and stumbled upon the horrifying sight of Richard and Mira's bodies. The alarm spread quickly through the estate, drawing panicked guests and then the authorities. At first glance, the scene seemed to suggest a drunken accident, just as Daniel had staged it. The broken glass, the spilled wine, and the positioning of the bodies gave an impression of carelessness turned fatal. Whispers filled the crowd as grief-stricken family members tried to comprehend how joy had turned to disaster overnight. The police, however, were less convinced by appearances. Investigators began their work with quiet precision, photographing every detail. Their trained eyes noticed what others missed. Blood spatter on the bridal suite's carpet didn't match the cellar scene. The champagne bottle, recovered later in the trash, bore faint traces of blood and hair. Daniel had overlooked the simplest truth: violence always leaves marks that cannot be hidden. Suspicion grew further when a neighbor reported seeing Richard heading toward the private wing of the estate after midnight. Why had he gone there alone, hours after the party had ended? Guests also recalled the tense expressions between Mira and Daniel earlier in the evening, subtle moments that now seemed loaded with meaning. As detectives pieced together timelines, inconsistencies began to pile up. Daniel's account of the night faltered under scrutiny, each detail raising more questions than answers. The carefully constructed illusion of an accident was unraveling strand by strand, and soon, every eye turned toward the groom as the one person with the most to lose. Forensic results arrived with devastating clarity, shattering the thin veil of Daniel's cover story. The wound on Richard's head bore the unmistakable pattern of a blunt strike, not an accidental fall. Mira's death told an even darker truth. Her lungs showed clear evidence of suffocation, her final moments stolen with deliberate force. The cellar scene, drenched in wine and shards of glass, was nothing more than a clumsy disguise. With each revelation, the narrative of a tragic accident dissolved into undeniable evidence of murder. Detectives called Daniel in for questioning, their tone calm but unyielding. At first, he clung to fragments of his story, but cracks quickly appeared. His explanations were inconsistent, his emotions volatile. The weight of guilt pressed on him, breaking through the defenses he had tried so hard to build. In the sterile silence of the interrogation room, he broke down, confessing to both killings. He insisted it had been a crime of passion, a chain of moments he could not control, his father's betrayal, his bride's disloyalty, the unbearable fury that consumed him. His words painted himself as a man pushed past his limits, but nothing could undo the carnage he had left behind. The case made international headlines, shocking families in 2 countries. What was supposed to symbolize unity between cultures became a cautionary tale whispered with horror. The Vineyard Estate, once a picture of love and celebration, was remembered instead as the site of betrayal and bloodshed. In court, Daniel stood alone, a groom without a bride, a son without a father. His wedding day had transformed into a day of funerals, and the story closed not with vows of forever, but with the cold judgment of justice.